Welcome friends to the Secret Doctrine webinar. This is the last class of this series and we are going to conclude with the stanza 6. We are going to explore the second part of this stanza, which begins to explore the evolution on Earth and more specifically on the evolutionary cycle that we are in right now. So let us go on with Shloka 4 that says, He, Fohat, builds them, the planets, in the likeness of all their wheels or worlds, placing them on the imperishable centers. How does Fohat build them? He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them and round them, infusing life thereinto. Then sets them into motion, some one, some the other way. They are cold, he makes them hot. They are dry, he makes them moist. They shine, he fans and cools them. Thus acts Fohat from one twilight to the other during 7 eternities. So let us start with the first sentence that says, He builds them in the likeness of all their wheels or worlds, placing them on the imperishable centers. And then Blavatsky explains, the worlds are built in the likeness of all their wheels, that is, those that existed in preceding Manvantaras and went into Pralaya. So this part of the shloka introduces a sense of continuity. There is the idea in the esoteric tradition that cycles of evolution begin and then they end to give rise to a new cycle of evolution. Now, these cycles of evolution are not independent from each other. They are a continuation in a wider process of evolution. So the new planets that are formed are always a continuity of evolution that took place on a previous planet. So there are Manvantara, remember, is the process of manifestation, and Pralaya is the process of dissolution and rest. So the new worlds that are built in the likeness or continuing the evolution of the previous worlds. And in this way, there is a new cycle which is nevertheless connected to the old cycles. Then Blavatsky goes on and says, It is an everlasting work of perfection with every new appearance. But the substance, matter, and forces are all one and the same. So even though there is this everlasting work of perfection with each new planet, with each new solar system, even with each new cosmos, she says the substance, matter, and the forces are one and the same. And she's referring to the essence of substance, to the essence of force. Remember, when the differentiated universe finishes a period of activity, everything goes back to oneness. And in that oneness are contained the essences of what during differentiation will become matter, force, consciousness. Now, this essence is the same behind any cycle of evolution. What is evolving is the expression of this essence, is how matter expresses itself, how forces and consciousness express themselves. So there is always this essential unity which is perfect from the very beginning, and then there are manifestations of that unity in limited forms which are ever perfected in order to be able to express the intrinsic perfection of the whole in a better and better way. Now, it is said that Fohat places these new worlds on the imperishable Laya centers. So Blavatsky explains the imperishable Laya centers have a great importance. and their meaning must be fully understood if we would have a clear conception of the archaic cosmogony. The worlds are built neither upon, nor over, nor in the Laya centers, the 0 points being a condition, not any mathematical point. When you see the commentaries or the discussions about the secret doctrine that Blavatsky had with some students, you can see how she had a difficult time trying to explain what the Laya centers are. Obviously, from the word center, we imagine that she's referring to a particular point in space. But she says these centers are not really in space, therefore we cannot say that the worlds are built in the centers, on the centers, or around the centers. Laya is a condition of matter. So we can think of Laya as a condition where, as we explained in previous classes, a condition of substance rather than matter, in which it is completely undifferentiated. From this undifferentiated substance, all the different kinds of matter in the universe, like physical, astral, mental, etc., from this undifferentiated substance, all these different kinds of matter will be produced. Now, the Laya condition is universally available, universally diffused. And when a new planet is going to be formed, planet or solar system, whatever system we are considering, when this is going to be formed, then in a particular point of space, substance will begin to differentiate. So the differentiation happens in a particular place in space, because the planet will be here and not there. However, the Laya condition is everywhere and is available always in the evolution of the universe. So it is Fohat the one that, so to say, chooses in what place the Laya condition will begin its activity of differentiation to form a planet. So this is what Blavatsky explains. It is Fohat who guides the transfer of the principles from one planet to the other, from one star to another child star. When a planet dies, its informing principles are transferred to a Laya or sleeping center with potential but latent energy in it, which is thus awakened into life and begins to form itself into the new sidereal body. So the Laya center is the potentiality of everything. We can regard matter as being sleeping there, energy and even consciousness as being possibilities, being sleeping. And then Fohat awakens this Laya condition in a particular point of space to form or to bring about the differentiation. Now, remember that in the previous class we said that the sentence, the wheels giving birth to other wheels, could be interpreted in two ways. Here, Blavatsky is referring to the second interpretation. We discussed a first way of interpreting this before, and this is the second way of interpreting that sentence which Blavatsky brings up. So the idea is, you see that she says, when a planet dies, its informing principles are transferred to a Laya or sleeping center. So there is the idea of a planet finishing the process of evolution, going into pralaya, and the principles being transferred for the formation of a new planet. In a certain sense, it's a kind of reincarnation of the planet. The new planet will be, allegorically speaking, a reincarnation of the previous planet. So this diagram was designed to explain the process, allegorically speaking. Remember that all these things happen in ways where space, and especially space, is not a barrier or is not a problem. But we could see in the theosophical view, the moon was in the past a planet on its own right. There was life evolving on the moon. There was even different kingdoms of life evolving on the moon. Then the moon came to the end of its evolution, and the principles of the moon were transferred for the formation of a new planet, which is planet Earth. So the esoteric philosophy doesn't agree with the current theory about the formation of the moon that is in science. In science, one of the most accepted theories is that when the Earth was in a process of formation, some asteroid impacted the Earth, and a chunk of its matter was ejected, and then that became the moon, what we call the moon. This is not the point of view of the esoteric philosophy. So the idea is that the moon, which was, because it is physical, would be the lowest globe here on the diagram, globe D. At the end of its evolution, the moon began to die and become what it is now, but it transferred its principles and energy, Blavatsky says, to a new Laya center around which a new planet will be formed, in this case the Earth. Now this happened with each of the globes that formed what we call the lunar chain. Remember that we said every physical globe is associated to 6 more globes that are on a different planes of perception, and these all together form a planetary chain. So evolution goes around this planetary chain for 7 times, and this would be the 7 rounds. So in the last round, when the evolution finishes on planet A, all the life of the kingdoms of nature that are evolving there are transferred to the globe B, and the principles of the planet itself are transferred to what will become a future globe A in a future planetary chain. So then evolution is going on B. When that evolution finishes, life moves on to globe C, and then globe D again transfers its principles to another Laya center that eventually will become the globe B in a new planetary chain. And so this is another way in which we can interpret the wheels giving birth to other wheels. In the last round, C will come to the end of its evolution and transfer its principle to a Laya center, which will become a future C. So with the D, as we explained, the moon, that will become the Earth, and with globe E, globe F, and globe G. All of them transfer one by one the principles to a new Laya center. Then there is a period of rest, or pralaya, and when the new planetary Manvantara begins, globe A, the Laya center and the principles that are in Laya state dormant will begin to awaken and form globe A, and then globe B will be formed, and C and D, etc. So this is part of what is called the rebirth of a planetary chain that this shloka is talking about. Now we come to the mechanics. How does Fohat build the planets? And it is said, he collects the fiery dust, which is spread out. He makes them balls of fire, runs through them and round them, infusing life thereinto. Then sets them into motion, some one, some the other way. They are cold, he makes them hot. They are dry, he makes them moist. They shine, he fans and cools them. So we can see how Fohat, this force, which, as we said, on the physical plane is represented by the electromagnetic force and all the derived force that come from this. We will see today a little about it. So this electromagnetic force, in the view of the esoteric philosophy, is behind the formation of the planets. And this is different from the regular view of science today, which believes gravity is the main force responsible for the formation of planets. Now, there are other theories in the electric universe theory of cosmology, for example, where they are postulating that electromagnetism has a far more important role than science has discovered yet. And that seems to be in line with the secret doctrine. But the steps of formation of a planet, they seem to correspond between the view of science and the esoteric philosophy. For example, the planet formation, the stages of planet formation in the view of modern science, from the beginning, the formation of the solar system, it is described that at the beginning there is a nebula, which is this dust and a cloud of dust and gas, which is shapeless. It doesn't have any structure in particular. It is spread out. And then at some point there is some disturbance, which science doesn't know what is the source of this disturbance. But from this state of rest begins motion, begins activity, and the nebula, which was a cloud, now begins to collapse in the center, in the form of a ball. So in the esoteric philosophy, it is Fohat, the activation of Fohat at the beginning of the Manvantara, that begins to move this shapeless cloud and generate this ball from which the solar system and the planets will be formed. So you see that the nebula is a pre-manifested state in a certain sense. It is from the nebula, or when the nebula awakens, that manifestation begins. Now, we are looking at the process of manifestation here on the physical plane. Manifestation begins on the inner planes, according to the esoteric philosophy, and the physical plane is the last link in the causes that bring the manifestation of the universe. So always remember, when we compare to science, we are looking at the lowest link in the process. But once the cloud of dust and gas collapses into a sphere, then by the activity of Fohat, we would say, the center begins to be compressed and gets hotter. And that heat is all the result of the activity of Fohat, of electromagnetism on the physical plane. Then the cloud begins to rotate and flattens in the form of a disk. And then within the disk, at different distances from the central nucleus, because we have a flat disk, and in the center there is a nucleus that begins to be formed. We already explained this when talking about the formation of the sun and the planets, that the sun was like the elder brother of the planets, but the planets didn't come out of the sun, which was what science believed when Blavatsky wrote The Secret Doctrine. So we have this flat disk with a center, which will become the sun, and this disk at different distances begins to form matter in a kind of orbit around the sun, and that matter begins to collect in balls, which will become the planets. So these little balls, little in comparison to the sun, are fiery balls of gas and molten liquid, which in time cool and condensate into solid form into what we call planets. Now, how this happens is a little more complex, and we are going to see it later. But you see how Fohat, there is the formless cloud, and Fohat begins to run around the cloud and to activate it and makes it hot, and then it makes it dry, and then it makes it cool so that the planets can form. To some extent, we can see that it's similar. Now there is something interesting in the shloka that says that Fohat sets the planets into motion, some in one direction and others in the other direction. Now, if rotation begins, as science says, just out of a natural result of the compression, because first we have the nebula that has no motion in particular, no direction of motion. When this begins to be compressed, science says that then rotation begins out of that compression. Now, if that were the case, we would expect all the planets within a solar system to rotate in the same direction, because it is just the natural result of the general compression that is going on there. In the shloka, we have that Fohat sets the planets in rotation in different directions. And that is actually what we see on the solar system. We see, for example, that Mercury and Jupiter has a rotation in a counterclockwise direction. But then Venus has a rotation in the clockwise direction. And then if we see Earth, Mars, Saturn, and Neptune, they have rotations in counterclockwise direction, but the axis of that rotation is tilted. And then Uranus has a completely different structure or plane of rotation. The axis is almost horizontal if we are taking as a reference the plane of translation of the planets, and then or rotation around the sun. And so it is horizontal, and then it has a motion that we could say is clockwise. So how is this possible if the rotation happens just naturally out of this compression of the nebula, the original nebula? In science, they say, well, maybe when the planets were being formed, an asteroid or some object hit the planet and set it in motion in the opposite direction, for example. Now, that doesn't seem really plausible, because if this happened when the planet was still like kind of gaseous or liquid, then the result of an impact would be that part of the mass would be ejected from it, but it's not likely to change the rotation of the planet, because the planet was still not solid enough to be able to affect the whole mass of the planet. Or if the planet was already solid and there is an impact that is strong enough to reverse the rotation of the planet, that would actually destroy the planet. So even though this is the only theory in science, because there are no other options with what science knows about right now, even though this is the theory now in science, it doesn't seem quite plausible. From the esoteric point of view, this is an effect of magnetism or electromagnetism acting in different ways on each planet. And the reason why they act in different ways is because the consciousness of the planet, what we could call a planetary spirit, remember that in the esoteric tradition, all physical things have a spiritual counterpart, have a consciousness counterpart. So the planets that we see are like the bodies of a planetary consciousness. So probably the different planetary consciousnesses are affecting how the planet is going to rotate. Of course, this is beyond the realm of science to prove or disprove. And then Blavatsky explains, Fohat has 7 sons who are his brothers, and he is forced to be born time after time whenever any 2 of his son brothers indulge in too close contact, whether an embrace or a fight. To avoid this, he binds together and unites those of unlike nature and separates those of similar temperaments. So here is the idea that Fohat has 7 sons who are his brothers. Again, this is similar to what we have discussed about the goddess, for example, being the mother, the wife, and the daughter of the logos, of the male counterpart. This idea of family is an allegorical expression of the relationship between the different forces. So on a certain plane, Fohat is the father of 7 forces that will manifest on a lower plane. But then on this lower plane, Fohat itself is one of the 7 manifestations. So for example, Blavatsky frequently relates Fohat to electricity. So we could say that Fohat on the physical plane, the direct emanation of Fohat on the physical plane is electricity. But then this electricity gives rise to several other forces which are like its brothers. So Fohat is at the same, on a higher plane is the father, on the lower plane he is on the same plane of 6 other differentiations that would be Fohat's brothers. And she talks about these differentiations. Blavatsky says the 7 sons brothers, however, represent and personify the 7 forms of cosmic magnetism called in practical occultism the 7 radicals, whose cooperative and active progeny are, among other energies, electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, cohesion, etc. So the idea is that all these forces that we see on the physical plane are the sons of Fohat on a higher plane. This is how Fohat manifests on the physical plane. So we know that electricity generates magnetism. The flow of electrons generates a magnetic field. So magnetism is in a certain sense the son of electricity, and so are many other forces. But they are, at the same time, they are brothers because they have a similar relationship. If we move a magnetic field, we can produce electricity too. Then she says, for example, light is obvious. Light is an electromagnetic wave, so we can say that light is related to Fohat as electricity. Cohesion also has to do with the electromagnetic forces, electronegative forces that are in different molecules, for example, in different substances. So they are related to electricity, to electromagnetism. Then she also adds sound and heat. Sound and heat are different kinds of kinetic forces. And normally science, or in the past, science would not relate sound, for example, or perhaps even heat to electricity or magnetism. But now recent experiments are beginning to show that both sound and heat are affected by the magnetic fields, for example. So basically what Blavatsky says is that all these forces that we see on the physical plane are differentiations of one single force, and this single force, which is called Fohat, it's manifested on the physical plane as this electromagnetic force. And actually science is beginning to see that, because the 4 basic forces in nature that are normally described are electromagnetism, the nuclear weak force, the nuclear strong force, the strong nuclear force, and then gravity. Of these 4 fundamental forces, they are beginning to see that the nuclear forces are forms of electromagnetism too. So only gravity is left without being connected to electromagnetism. But then gravity is a problem, as we are going to see soon. So little by little, science is beginning to discover that at the root of all the forces in nature, we have electromagnetism. And now Blavatsky says that when the different forces get in touch with each other, then there are this kind of Fohat has to be born out of this. So whether the forces are in conflict, struggling with each other, or the forces are uniting with each other. So this is how, this is basically talking about the transformation of forces from one form into the other. And she says that Fohat binds together and unites those of unlike nature and separates those of similar temperaments. And I think this is referring to how the magnetism works. The two different poles of a magnet attract themselves, and then the two similar poles repel themselves. So the whole universe, physical universe, is built on these rules, on the nature of electromagnetism, according to the esoteric philosophy. And Blavatsky says that with these verses end that portion of the stanzas which relates to the universal cosmogony after the last Mahapralaya, after the last big pralaya or universal destruction, which, when it comes, sweeps out of space every differentiated thing, gods as atoms, like so many dry leaves. From this verse onwards, the stanzas are concerned only with our solar system in general, with the planetary chains therein, inferentially, and with the history of our globe, the fourth in its planetary chain especially. All the stanzas and verses which follow in this Book 1 refer only to the evolution of and on our Earth. So as we explained before, the stanzas begin describing universal themes, universal states that can be applied to the whole cosmos. But as we move from the universal to the particular, the stanzas naturally begin to talk about what happened with one of those particulars. In our case, what we are interested in is what happened with our planet and with our humanity. So as we come closer and closer to zooming in the process of manifestation, the shlokas begin to become more and more particular about what went on in the formation of our solar system, and then more particularly of our Earth. So the next shlokas are part of the explain the formation of the Earth, specifically in the particular evolutionary cycle in which we are right now. Now, from the fourth shloka, we are jumping into the sixth. The fifth shloka seems to be out of place in the sequence. Blavatsky admits in The Secret Doctrine that this shloka 5 breaks the continuity, and she says that it is necessary to bring the shloka 5 so that we can see the whole scheme. Now, since the shloka 5 talks about the appearance of humanity on Earth, I think we can look at that in the next series when we talk about stanza 7, which deals with the appearance of humanity on Earth. So that we don't break the continuity, we will go on with shloka 6 that talks about the evolution of our planetary chain in particular. So the shloka 6 says, "The older wheels rotated downward and upward. The mother spawn filled the whole cosmos. There were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously." So she explains between this shloka and the last, shloka 4, in this same stanza, extend long ages, and there now gleams the dawn and sunrise of another eon, or evolutionary cycle. The drama enacted on our planet is at the beginning of its fourth act. So Once the planetary chain is formed, remember from the moon, the evolution in the planetary moon, the lunar chain ceases, principles are transferred to form the Earth planetary chain. There is a pralaya, and then there is the formation. Foha begins to form the Earth, and that's the last thing that we discussed. Now this shloka goes into the fourth round in the evolution of the Earth. So life went through the 7 globes that formed its planetary chain 3 times, and now we are in the fourth, at the beginning of the 4th chapter, or the 4th act, as she says, on the Earth, on the physical level. And this is explained by the older wheels rotated downward and upward. Blavatsky explains the phrase older wheels refers to the worlds or globes of our chain as they were during the previous rounds. The present stanza refers to the evolution of those countless globes which evolve after a periodical pralaya, rebuilt from all material into new forms. This is just a summary of what we have been saying. The previous globes, like the moon, for example, disintegrate and reappear transformed and perfected for a new phase of life. So as we said, the Earth is a more perfected evolution of the moon, and then the next planetary chain that will come after the evolution on Earth finishes will be a more perfected expression of evolution than the Earth is. So there is always this evolutionary movement. And now the idea of rotated downward and upward is referring to this idea of the U shape of evolution that we see in the diagram of the planetary chains. From globe A, evolution goes down to globe D, and then it goes back up on different planes to the last globe G. So this shloka is saying evolution went on for going down and up for 4 times in this particular case. And at this point, Blavatsky introduces a diagram that I wanted to share with you. We have seen a few simple diagrams about the planetary chains, but here Blavatsky puts the chain in the context of the 7 planes of the universe. And she, in the Secret Doctrine, she uses this diagram to compare it with the Tree of Life and the Sephirah, the Sephirot in the Kabbalah, but we don't need to go into that. We can focus our attention on the planetary chain according to the esoteric philosophy. So she's showing 3 higher planes and then 4 lower planes. The planetary chain, as we mentioned before, occupies the 4 lower planes of the universe. Blavatsky explains that the 3 higher planes are beyond our conception, and therefore not much is said about it. She writes that these are the 3 higher planes of the septenary cosmos, which can be regarded collectively as the divine and formless world of spirit. Of course, there are hierarchies of beings here, but they are far beyond anything our consciousness can discern. For us, this is just divine and formless unity. And then the 4 lower planes, she uses these words that she takes them from the Kabbalah. The archetypal, the planes that, or a globe that is on this plane is called archetypal world. On the next plane is an intellectual or creative world. On the next plane is a substantial or formative world. And on the physical plane is a physical or material world. So she explains that the 2 higher globes, globe 8 and G, are on the archetypal world. Archetype in the sense that Plato used it. Plato said that there exists this ideal pattern of anything that we see as a concrete object on the physical plane, objects that can be in many diverse forms. For example, chairs. There are chairs, many different kinds of chair, but there is an archetypal idea of what a chair is, not this particular chair or that particular chair, but what we could call the chairness, the quality that allows us to recognize that something is a chair and not a table, for example. And this is what Plato would call archetypes. Everything in nature, human beings, chairs, trees, they all have an ideal form, a blueprint, an abstract blueprint from which or of which all the diversity that we see on the physical plane is a manifestation. So the first two globes, globe A and B, are worlds on this archetypal plane. And it is at the beginning of a round of evolution that on globe A we find the seeds, the blueprints of anything that will gradually manifest as evolution goes down to the physical plane. Then the next world, or the globes or worlds that are on the next plane, are said to be intellectual or creative worlds. Here is where creation begins, where the process of bringing into manifestation these archetypes begins. First as an idea, as a more concrete idea of this abstract archetype. And it's just the beginning of the creation of forms. Then we go to a lower plane, the substantial or formative world, in which those ideas begin to assume a primal form, a form that is still fluid, a form that is not quite rigid and solid, but is the beginning of form. And eventually, evolution comes to the physical, material world, where that abstract original idea is manifested now in specific forms which vary from each other in infinite ways. So this is how Blavatsky puts the different globes on the different planes of the universe. We are now on globe D, and this is the fourth time that we have visited this planet, so to say. Not as physical human beings. As we are going to see, humanity became physical only on this evolutionary round. The previous rounds are more a kind of gestation of planets, of kingdoms, all the kingdoms of nature, including humanity. But humanity as we know it today has begun only in this fourth round. Now, in the process of creating these globes, the shloka says there were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously. And Blavatsky explains, here seed stands for world germ, viewed by science as material particles in highly attenuated condition, but in occult physics as spiritual particles, that is, supersensuous matter existing in a state of primeval differentiation. So first, there is the idea of the seeds, of the germs of the worlds. In science, as we are going to see, there is the idea that for the formation of the planets, we have at the beginning many very small planets that are called planetesimals. These are the germs of what may become a planet in the future. Now, what Blavatsky says is that while science sees matter, the esoteric philosophy or the occult physics sees also the consciousness that is behind. For example, she says in the next paragraph, in theogony, this means the birth of the gods, every seed is an ethereal organism from which evolves later on a celestial being or God. So remember I mentioned that from the point of the esoteric philosophy, planets are the physical manifestation of a spiritual consciousness, and so is the solar system and anything within. So while science tends to look only at the physical aspect, the esoteric philosophy looks at both. So when we see a nebula in which different stars are being formed and planets, we see not only the physical aspect, but also we can see planetary spirits there, planetary consciousness, which is actively working through Fohat, through the Fohat generated by that particular celestial being, forming the planet or forming the solar system or whatever system we are examining. So this is always important to keep in mind. Now Blavatsky says Fohat caused the universe to move with circular motion. We already discussed this in previous stanzas. As Plato has it, or as the occult teaching expresses it. And she brings a commentary found in the book of Xian. The central sun causes Fohat to collect primordial dust in the form of balls, to impel them to move in converging lines, and finally to approach each other and aggregate. So we are a little back talking again about the formation of these globes, and the central sun is the spiritual consciousness behind the sun. That is what is called the central sun, and it is from the central sun that Fohat comes and begins to collect this primordial dust in little balls, and then it impels them to move in converging lines. This is what we explained before, that all these little lumps of matter begin to rotate in an orbit, and they begin to collapse with each other and to aggregate until they begin to form what will become a planet. Now, all this is said in the context of these battles fought, because this process can be allegorically explained as a battle for space, as we are going to see. So the commentary goes on saying, being scattered in space without order or system, the world germs come into frequent collision until they are final aggregation, after which they become wanderers. And Blavatsky puts in parentheses comets. Now, she doesn't necessarily refer to comets as we know them today, although Blavatsky says that many times the comets, when they get established in an orbit, they are the seed for the formation of a new world. But we can interpret this in a more general sense, like when these primordial bodies that are still small, that are in the process of aggregate, when they are moving around without an orderly motion, and so they are the wanderers. And then the battles and struggles begin. The older bodies attract the younger, while others repel them. Many perish, devoured by their stronger companions. Those that escape become worlds. So Blavatsky says this is the first war in heaven, allegorically speaking. All these germs of worlds struggling to assimilate others and establish themselves into an orbit around the sun, and then be born as a planet. So as I was saying, the scientific view is quite similar to this. This is how they explain the formation of these germs of worlds. Self-accretion, which means this process of coming together and becoming little lumps in the cosmic dust. Self-accretion of cosmic dust accelerates the growth of the particles into boulder-sized planetesimals. These are the germs of the planets. The more massive planetesimals accrete some smaller ones. This is what the commentary was explaining. It begins to assimilate the smaller ones or the younger ones, while others shatter in collisions. When the bodies reach sizes of approximately 1 kilometer, then they can attract each other directly through their mutual gravity, enormously aiding further growth into moon-sized protoplanets. So you see this, the science explains in a similar way this battle for space. Now remember that the Book of Xi'an was written thousands of years ago, even before civilization began. As we are going to see more specifically in our third series, in the next series, humanity was actually taught by a series of conscious celestial beings that had been human beings in previous evolutions. They come to the earth and they actually teach the early humanity, and the Book of Xi'an comes from that time. So before we had developed any of this, the knowledge of how the planets were formed was already there. Now, you see that it says that gravity brings everything together. Now, Blavatsky, as I briefly mentioned, was against this idea of gravity. She says in the commentaries on The Secret Doctrine, this is a book that published the dialogues that she had with some students, there is such a thing as attraction and repulsion, and in occultism it stands in the place of gravity, the scientific teachings about which we reject. So Blavatsky always said that there is attraction and repulsion, but that is not gravity. Gravity is not a real force. She says we are using the word gravity to describe this attraction between the planets, but the attraction is the result of a different force. Gravity is just a name. And this is something that science is beginning to see, because there are two main theories that explain the universe: relativity, which explains the universe at large, and quantum physics, which explains the subatomic universe, let's say. Now, if you extrapolate these theories, the two should be able to blend into each other, and yet they cannot. They are incompatible. So when quantum physics begins to look at the forces, they were able to find, of all these four forces of nature that I mentioned, they were able to find three of them from the quantic point of view, except for gravity. In quantum physics, they say that all forces need a quantum particle that is the carrier of that force. They found carriers for all the other forces except for gravity. This is the graviton that they are trying to find. And if we interpret correctly what Blavatsky says, they are not going to find it because there will not be any graviton. Gravity is not a force, Blavatsky used to say. So in her view, it is electromagnetism which is behind, as we have been seeing, the motion and attraction of the planets. And electromagnetism, as we said, is a manifestation of Fohat. So then the next shloka says, make thy calculations, O Lanu. Lanu is a word for disciple. If thou wouldest learn the correct age of thy small wheel. Its fourth spoke is our mother, the earth. Reach the fourth fruit of the fourth path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see. So first, the shloka mentions the small wheel, which fourth spoke is our mother. And Blavatsky explains the small wheel is our chain of spheres, the planetary chain, the Earth planetary chain. And the fourth spoke is our Earth. remember the globe D, the fourth in the chain. It is on the fourth globe, which the hot, she says, positive breath of the sun has a direct effect. This comes from a commentary of the stanzas of Xian. And the idea here is that the hot breath of the sun is the heat that comes from the sun, which affects only the fourth globe, because the fourth globe is the physical one. Now make thy calculations, O Anu, if thou wouldest learn the correct age of the earth. And Blavatsky says, to calculate its age, however, as the pupil is asked to do in the stanza, is rather difficult, since we are not given the figures of the great Kalpa. Kalpa is an evolutionary cycle, and we are not allowed to publish those of our small yugas. So the Kalpa is the evolutionary cycle of the whole planetary chain, and the yugas are smaller cycles within the planetary chain. So she says, we are not given the figures of the great Kalpa, so she doesn't know the true duration of the whole chain, and we are not allowed to publish those of the small yugas, except as to the approximate duration of these. So Blavatsky does publish every now and then some years using the Hindu chronology. She says that the Hindu chronology is close enough to the esoteric chronology, and that whenever she mentions years, she normally relied on the Hindu chronology because she couldn't publish the true numbers. Now, why wouldn't they publish the true numbers in the Mahatma letters, which are writings that came from Blavatsky's teachers? It is said that knowing the cycles of nature, we can realize how to manipulate people's minds, because nature, the external nature and the inner nature, are completely connected, and knowing the exact numbers would reveal how our psyche works, and that would allow people who would look into this to control others. That could allow these people to discover certain rules of psychology, which is dangerous for humanity to know at this point in evolution, because we tend to use this knowledge in a selfish way. So that may be one of the reasons why the true numbers are not allowed to be published. However, Blavatsky does publish, as I said, some numbers which, being close enough, may give us a general idea of the scale of time that we are talking about. And now Blavatsky says also, we have no knowledge at what time precisely the evolution and formation of our little Earth began. Therefore, it is impossible to calculate its age, unless the time of its birth is given, which the teachers refuse to do so far. Of course, science has a speculation about when the Earth began. That is an inference, is a theory, shouldn't be taken as something that has been proven. And the esoteric philosophy also has some numbers, which, as I said, we know are not the correct ones, but we can see that the numbers that science is talking about and the numbers that we get from Blavatsky are both within more or less the same scale. We are talking about billion of years in both cases, for example, not that one is talking about trillions and the other thousands or vice versa. So both of them coincide in the scale of time that we are talking about. Now, in an article that Blavatsky did not publish, she died and this was found among her papers, she does assign some numbers to the different evolutionary cycles, which again, we don't know how accurate they are, they do follow the Hindu chronology, so we can say these numbers are probably close enough, but they are not the correct numbers. Now I wanted to bring them up to have an idea of what kind of time scale we are talking about. So the idea is that the 7 rounds of evolution around the planetary chain will last for about 4 billion years, 4,320,000,000 years. This is what the Hindu chronology says. When science talks about the Earth, they also said that the Earth must be around 4 billion years. Now, in this particular case, since we are more or less halfway the evolution of the Earth, or we are over halfway, if this number were correct, then probably the age of the Earth should be closer to 3 billion years. But again, what I was saying, between 2 billion and 3 billion years, there is no much difference, relatively speaking. So we can assume that that's more or less the age of the Earth. Now, the 4th round around these 7 globes lasts for, according to these numbers, about 600 million years. Now, we have to remember that there is in every cycle of evolution, half of the cycle is a cycle of activity, and the other half of the cycle is a period of rest. So even though the 4th round lasts for 600 million years, the actual time that we take going around the planets is half of it, as Blavatsky explains in a footnote, is about 308 million years. And then there is a rest before starting the next round, which lasts the same amount of years. Now, if we zoom in into this 4th round around each one of the globes, we have the planet or globe A, B, C, D. What's the duration of evolution within this round on each of the globes? So Blavatsky says evolution lasts on globe 8 for 11 million years. And then on globe D, that is the Earth, the human evolution, not the evolution of the planet, but the human evolution, lasts for 44 million years. Now we have to keep in mind that we are, according to the esoteric philosophy, we are over half of the evolutionary cycle. So if we talk, about this in a general way, there may be, say, 20 more million years for evolution to go on. Now, when Blavatsky talks about the beginning of human beings, she says that human beings began to be physical on Earth 18 million years ago. This is far more than science is ready to accept. When science is looking at the fossils, they may go up to 4 million years for some very early species that we could say is the beginning of humanity. Now, the esoteric philosophy says that humanity in its physical form started 18 million years ago. But this is, the idea in the esoteric philosophy is that the different cycles of evolution take place on continents that are submerged when the cycle of evolution is over. So in the esoteric view, when one cycle of evolution finishes, the continent goes down into the ocean and a new continent appears. So it's for this reason that the fossils that are older than what science is finding, they are not going to be found most likely by science. So the next part of the shloka says, reach the fourth fruit of the fourth path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see. And Blavatsky explains, there are 4 grades of initiation mentioned in exoteric works, which are known respectively in Sanskrit as Shrotapana, Sagardagan, Anagamin, and Arhan. The 4 paths to Nirvana in this are 4th round, hearing the same appellations. So she explains that there are 4 initiations. When she uses the word initiation, she's applying it in a specific way. There are many initiations that are undergone when joining organizations or religions. There is an initiation for Freemasonry, or there are initiations in Hinduism, in Buddhism. But those are initiations that happen to the person within the body, let's say. The initiations that Blavatsky talks about are what we could call initiations of the soul. This happens to the soul, not to the physical personality. And these are initiations into the occult path. They all imply a degree of enlightenment, if we want to put it that way. So she explains that there are 4 initiations that will make of a person an arhat. And this is the initiation that the shloka is referring to here. Reach the 4th fruit of the 4th path of knowledge that leads to nirvana. It's this 4th initiation that takes the person to nirvana. And then thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see. So the idea is that once the adept attains the 4th initiation, then he can know about all these processes and numbers and the time that passed, because he shall see. He will be able to see all this by direct experience. Now, Blavatsky explains that the Arhan, although he can see the past, the present, and the future, is not yet the highest initiate. For the adept himself, the initiated candidate, becomes a chela or pupil to a higher initiate. 3 further higher degrees have to be conquered by the Arhan, who would reach the apex of the ladder of Arabship. So in Blavatsky's view, there are 7 degrees of initiation. The 4th one is the end of a particular cycle of initiation and the beginning of a higher one. So when reaching the 4th initiation, the person that is called an Arhan or Arhat is able to see the past, the present, and the future. That person has access to what we call nirvana. But this is not the highest initiation that can be obtained in this particular evolutionary chain, in this planetary chain. There are 3 higher initiations that are available to the consciousness of the person. And therefore there are 7 degrees of occult initiations. And it is only then that a person may know all these things by direct experience. So this concludes the stanza 6 and this 2nd series. In our 3rd series, we are going to explore stanza 7 that talks about the formation of human beings. And then we will also explore some stanzas from the 2nd volume of the Secret Doctrine, which is about anthropogenesis. It's about the appearance of human beings on Earth and their evolution.